Sometimes, a criminal is so cautious that even the correct course of investigation does not lead to a result. Years, decades pass. The case gathers dust. But technology doesn't stand still. And one day, archival evidence begins to speak. Antioch is a small Californian town with a population of 100,000. A quiet place where something truly terrible rarely happens. But in June 1980, an event occurred here that shocked all residents. And for decades, it changed the feeling of security in these peaceful neighborhoods. Sunday, June 22. Around 4 in the morning, 25-year-old Stephanie Mallon returns home. Her shift at the restaurant was over. After work, she stopped by a colleague's place. Now, all she wanted was to sleep. The key turns in the lock. Inside, it's dark and quiet. Walking through the first floor, the woman notices her 14-year-old cousin, Susan Bombardier, is nowhere to be seen. Usually, the girl waited for her in the living room on the sofa.
Stephanie stops in the doorway. She listens. Silence. She calls out to her sister several times. No one answers. Strange, but not enough to cause panic. Too early, too dark. Besides, Stephanie's 2 daughters, aged 5 and 6, are asleep upstairs. No need to wake them. The woman decides that Susan likely fell asleep in the children's room and goes to bed. Fatigue takes its toll. The previous evening, she had asked her sister to look after the girls. Susan loved spending time with her nieces and readily agreed. The responsible high schooler saw it as an important adult task, an opportunity to show that she could be relied upon. A few hours later, Stephanie wakes up and starts preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee fills the kitchen. The phone rings. Susan's mother asks when her daughter will return. Stephanie puts down the frying pan. She goes to the children's room to wake her sister, but she's not there. The bed is untouched. The girls say they woke up alone. It's unclear where Susan is. Stephanie searches the entire house, first floor, second. She looks in the bathroom, in the pantry. No traces. It becomes clear her sister hadn't even spent the night here. This is frightening. Truly frightening. Susan was never a problematic teenager. She didn't run away, didn't meet anyone. And most importantly, she would never have left small children unsupervised. That would be completely out of character for her. Stephanie begins to carefully search the house for any clues. She checks if her sister left a note. She looks at the phone. Perhaps a missed call? Nothing. Together with her mother, whose voice sounds increasingly anxious, they decide to contact the police. They can't wait any longer. The arriving officers immediately begin to reconstruct the timeline. They take out notebooks. They ask questions methodically, unhurriedly. According to Stephanie, on the evening of June 21, she was leaving for her shift and asked Susan to stay with the children. After work, she planned to stop by a colleague's birthday party. The restaurant was nearby, but she didn't want to leave her daughters alone, not even for a couple of hours. Around 8 in the evening on June 21, Stephanie called home and asked her sister to bring clean clothes to work. Her uniform had gotten dirty. The girl agreed and fulfilled the request. She walked 2 blocks, handed over the clothes. This was their last meeting. Susan looked normal. She was smiling, hurrying back to the girls.
As she saw her off, Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved. An ordinary evening, nothing unusual. Colleagues and both daughters confirm these words. The girls recounted. Susan returned home and immediately began putting them to bed. She fed them dinner, macaroni and cheese, their favorite. She helped pick up toys scattered on the floor. They remembered what their aunt was wearing, a nightgown and a red robe. Soft, homely. Evidently, she wasn't planning on going anywhere. After the children were in bed, Susan planned to watch TV or read, her favorite pastime. The remote control was on the armrest of the sofa. It was planned that she would spend the night at her sister's and return home in the morning, as usual. At 1:30 in the morning, Stephanie, who was at a party, called home again to check if everything was all right. The music was playing loudly, so she had to step aside. Susan answered quickly, her voice sleepy, saying that the children were asleep. Everything was fine. She added that she was going to bed herself. She was tired. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Stephanie hung up and returned to the guests, suspecting nothing. Witness testimonies allowed for the reconstruction of the events. The disappearance occurred between 1:30, when the last call was made, and 4 in the morning, when Stephanie returned and didn't find her sister. 2.5 hours, a narrow time window. The mother and sister immediately rejected the runaway theory, categorically. Susan was a calm, compliant girl. There were no conflicts with her family. Her teenage years passed without incidents, no breakdowns, no scandals. Furthermore, all her belongings, bag, clothes, shoes, remained in place. Her sneakers were by the door. Her jacket hung in the closet. Running away in a robe and slippers? Absurd. A kidnapping theory emerged. Perhaps burglars broke into the house, and Susan tried to interfere or became an accidental witness. But this theory seemed unlikely. Detectives meticulously inspect the rooms. Nothing was missing. Neither money from Stephanie's wallet nor jewelry lying on the dresser. No signs of forced entry were found. The locks were intact. The windows closed from the inside. This meant the girl knew the person who took her and let him in voluntarily. There were no signs of a struggle in the house. Furniture, belongings, everything in its place. The cushions on the sofa were neatly arranged. The children in the adjacent rooms heard nothing. They woke up calmly, as always. Detectives began questioning neighbors. Stephanie lived in a townhouse with other families next door who might have heard something through the walls. Officers went from door to door asking the same questions. But no one noticed anything. No noise, no voices, no slamming door. Nothing suspicious. The disappearance of the 14-year-old schoolgirl became the most unsettling incident in this quiet area. Already on the first day, the case seemed extremely mysterious. The investigation had no leads, not a single thread to pull. The police began active work, inspecting the area around the house, meticulously examining the premises. Detectives combed through bushes, looked under cars, checked trash cans. This yielded no new data. They questioned all neighbors in the vicinity. Some had seen something, some hadn't, but nothing significant. They visited the school where Susan studied. Teachers were in shock. Classmates were silent, not knowing what to say. Everyone was disturbed, but no one could provide any clues. No one noticed any suspicious strangers or cars that night. Neither a slow-moving car nor a person loitering aimlessly. That Sunday evening was no different from others. Surveillance cameras were out of the question in 1980. Those were different times. The investigation reached a dead end. Investigators appealed to the public, hoping to get information from random witnesses. They placed advertisements in newspapers, spoke on local radio. It didn't work. Several reports were made to the station, but all turned out to be false leads. Someone had seen a similar girl in another town. Someone had heard rumors. Nothing concrete. 5 days passed since the disappearance. No progress. They began to assume the worst, that Susan was no longer alive. Relatives did not want to believe this and continued to hope. The family actively spread information, posting flyers on streets, on poles, in shops. A photograph of the girl looked out from every corner, smiling, with long hair. After analyzing her immediate surroundings, detectives found no people posing a threat to the schoolgirl. Her social circle contained no problematic teenagers, only ordinary peers, equally quiet. They began checking registered sex offenders in the county. Several such individuals were found, but all had confirmed alibis. Someone was at work, someone at home with family. All checked. Everything changed on June 27th. A hot day, the sun was scorching. Approximately 100 kilometers from Stephanie's home, on the San Joaquin River, a man was fishing. Early in the morning, when the fog had not yet dispersed, he noticed something suspicious in the water. A rather large object was drifting downstream. At first, he thought it was a log or a bag of trash. Paddling closer in his boat, he saw a naked body, a girl, pale, motionless. She had washed ashore near the bridge. The witness immediately called the police, his voice trembling as he explained to the dispatcher what he had found. The deceased was recovered and sent for forensic examination. The body had been in the water for several days. Decomposition had begun, the skin had whitened, but it wasn't severe enough to hide all traces. According to the expert's conclusion, there were signs of violent acts. The cause of death was a stab wound to the chest. One, but deep. The killer had pierced her heart. Death occurred quickly, possibly within a minute. There were no documents or personal items on the deceased for identification. No clothes, no jewelry, nothing. They began to check against missing persons reports in the county. The list was small, but they checked every name. Among them was a report from the Bombardier family. Due to the warm weather and the effects of water, the body was swollen and facial features had changed. Final identification was carried out using dental records, the only reliable method. The medical examiner confirmed the victim was the missing Susan. The parents had to hear this. Biological material from the perpetrator was collected, traces under the fingernails, samples from the body. Attempts were even made to study it, but the technologies of the 80s allowed practically nothing to be done. Microscopes, chemical tests, all of this provided minimal information. Databases for matching information did not yet exist. DNA analysis was only just emerging in laboratories somewhere, but practical application was far off. All law enforcement could do was send the collected samples to the archive, seal them in bags, label them,
and continue the search using other methods, old, proven ones. The case of Susan's disappearance was officially reclassified as a murder investigation. The folder changed color, the status changed. There were several suspects. They managed to identify a man prone to aggression who lived in the same area as Stephanie's house. A conviction for fighting, several complaints from neighbors. He was interrogated for a long time, but he remained confident. The second suspect was the victim's sister's ex-boyfriend. They had dated for a short time. The young woman said he behaved strangely, too persistent, too pushy, so she decided to end the relationship after a few dates. The day before Susan's disappearance, he came to Stephanie's townhouse, stood on the doorstep, asking for a second chance. She saw him through the peephole before opening the door. Upon being rejected, he stood for another minute, then turned and left. There simply were no other suspicious men in the family's circle. Only these two could the murdered girl have known and let into the house without apprehension. Detectives thoroughly investigated both, conducting interrogations, checking alibis, searching for witnesses, but irrefutable evidence could not be found. No witnesses, no fingerprints in the house, nothing that would link the suspects to the crime. The techniques of that time were limited. Gradually, they stopped pursuing them, though they kept them in mind. Further attempts to find the killer yielded no results. Investigators worked for months, checking lead after lead, but each ended in a dead end. All case materials were collected, testimonies, photographs, samples, and sent to the archives for many years. The boxes gathered dust on the shelves. 14-year-old Susan Bombardier was buried in Lafayette Cemetery. A small ceremony, many flowers. Her death was a real blow to all her loved ones. The girl's mother, upon learning of the discovery, simply collapsed to the floor, unable to stand. She lost consciousness right in the living room when the detective uttered the words of confirmation. Just an hour after the tragic news, when she was still unable to recover, Susan's academic certificate was handed to the family. The document arrived by mail, a cruel coincidence. It contained only top grades. She was an excellent student. A future that would no longer be. The local community was shocked and frightened. Parents started walking their children to school, locking doors with all locks. Everyone was particularly displeased with the police's inability to find the killer. For a long time, the station received calls from concerned residents who hoped for the perpetrator's capture, demanding updates. Reports were made about specific people. Someone suspected a neighbor, someone a colleague, but all turned out to be false leads. Each was checked, but to no avail. Subsequently, repeated attempts were made to study the perpetrator's DNA profile, collected from the victim's body, and compare it with existing databases, especially in the 90s, when technologies began to develop. Unsuccessfully. The quality of the material was insufficient. Samples had degraded over years of storage, and technologies were still too weak. More advanced methods were required, which did not yet exist. Gradually, the crime began to be forgotten. New cases, new tragedies pushed out the old ones. By the 2000s, Susan Bombardier's name was remembered only by the town's old-timers, those who lived there in the 80s, and her family, who still hoped for justice to prevail. Her mother visited the grave every year on the anniversary.
When Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons, a local newspaper journalist, heard about this frightening story, she was shocked. She delved into the archives, looking for material for an article on cold cases, and came across Susan's name. A killer capable of such an act was still at large and could be free, nearby, perhaps in the next house. In 2014, the reporter found the girl's grave, a simple gray stone, faded flowers, and began blogging about the unsolved crime. She frequently communicated with the victim's family, visited their home, and recorded their memories. She spoke with local residents who still remembered that day. She met with the detectives who had worked on the case, now elderly, retired, but still remembering every detail. Regular publications of Susan's story attracted attention, first local, then wider. The public responded. Law enforcement noticed. People once again began to ask, what happened to the girl, and why was the perpetrator still unpunished? Letters came to the editorial office. Discussions appeared on forums. The police had not been inactive before, but now there was a strong motivation to solve the case. Public pressure, press attention. Several young, enthusiastic officers approached the sheriff, asking for the opportunity and resources to work on the unsolved murder. They wanted to try. The sheriff hesitated, but agreed. In 2015, DNA samples from Susan Bombardier's case were retrieved from the archive. Dusty boxes, old labels. Immediately after the formation of a cold case investigation task force. It included several enthusiastic police officers who faced a challenging task. This case became Antioch's oldest unsolved violent crime. 35 years of silence. The period was not chosen by chance. Shortly before the reinitiation of the investigation, new forensic technologies emerged, allowing work even with poor quality samples, old materials, or a minimal amount of information sources. Next-generation genetic sequencers, computer algorithms, all of this changed the game. Evidence nearly 40 years old was sent to the San Mateo County Forensic Laboratory. The sealed packages were opened carefully. For the first time, a complete DNA profile of the perpetrator was successfully created. Full, detailed, suitable for comparison. Before this, attempts had been made, but technology did not allow for success. Now, the situation had changed. A breakthrough. Having obtained the killer's full profile in early 2017, they decided to check it against the database of registered criminals, CODIS, a national system. They uploaded the profile, launched a search. Unexpectedly, a preliminary identification pointed to Mitchell Bacon, a match, a true breakthrough in the case. Detectives did not immediately believe in the success. It was too good to be true. So they conducted additional tests. They rechecked everything twice. The profile was checked against the FBI DNA database, another confirmation. After this, the samples were definitively linked to this man. The probability of error approached zero. He turned out to be the very suspicious boyfriend of Stephanie, with whom she had broken up shortly before Susan's murder. The same one who was investigated in the 80s but released. Naturally, this man did not end up in the database by chance. Police easily uncovered his extensive criminal history, a long rap sheet. Mitchell Lynn Bacon was born on March 21, 1954, in one of California's small towns. An ordinary family, nothing remarkable. In high school, he moved to Antioch, the same place where Stephanie and Susan lived. Fate brought them together.
He had indeed been a suspect for a long time in the teenager's murder case, but there was insufficient evidence against him until 2017. For 37 years, he lived an ordinary life. As it turned out, back in 1973, he was convicted of several crimes at once. Young, but already dangerous. After the trial for assault, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Based on the charges filed, he could have received life imprisonment, serious offenses. But he had not been registered as a criminal before that, a clean record, so the court showed leniency. First conviction, youth, mitigating circumstances. After serving a short term, he was free again. He was released, returned to the same city. But already in 1981, he was again convicted of several criminal episodes and found guilty. Less than a year after Susan's murder. Now a hardened criminal, he received 24 years in prison. The court was stricter. All his crimes were related to unlawful acts of a sexual nature. The modus operandi was the same. After his release, which happened in the early 2000s, the man was ordered to register as a person prone to sexual assaults, a standard procedure for such convicts. He failed to do so, ignored the requirement, and therefore, in 2002, received an additional 4 years for violating the terms of his release, back to jail. After this, he appeared in databases, fingerprints, photographs, a DNA sample. In 2017, when police came for 63-year-old Mitchell Backham, he was living in the same city, Antioch. He hadn't left. He was taken into custody without resistance as he calmly returned from a store with a bag of groceries. An ordinary day, an ordinary elderly man. The handcuffs clicked shut. The killer denied any connection to Antioch's oldest unsolved murder. He shook his head, said it was a mistake, but the evidence against him was irrefutable. Genetics don't lie. After establishing Mitchell's connection to Susan's murder, detectives held a press conference with cameras, microphones, journalists, and announced that his DNA sample was planned to be matched against a number of other cold cases. It's possible he killed others. Too professional a modus operandi for a single instance. At the time of his arrest, the man was 63 years old. He had remained unpunished for a full 37 years. Given that his modus operandi resembled that of a serial offender, methodical, no panic, it was believed that he could have committed numerous similar acts during his years of freedom. How many exactly is unknown. Finally, the victim's family had hope for justice after so many years. The main problem that prevented Mitchell from being brought to justice in the 80s was an alibi, ironclad at first glance. He stated that he was spending time with his aunt at a bar in a neighboring town, quite far from where Susan was babysitting, 40 kilometers at least.
According to him, he left the bar only around 2 in the morning and stopped at an intersection at the city entrance. He stopped at a convenience store to buy cigarettes, as he explained. The salesperson recognized him. They exchanged a few words. Then Mitchell drove home. That's how he told detectives, calmly, confidently. Because of these movements, he had a very small time window, maybe an hour and a half. Detectives of those years considered him an unlikely killer. There was almost no time left. The distance was great.
Also, thanks to the confirmation of his words by his aunt and the salesperson. Both provided testimonies. They couldn't link the perpetrator to the murder then, although he looked more suspicious than anyone. Intuition told detectives one thing, but the evidence another. Stephanie herself believed that Mitchell might have been involved in the abduction and murder of her cousin. She spoke about it openly, insisted. He knew their entire family, including the teenager. They had met several times during the couple's brief relationship. They had crossed paths at home, at a restaurant. Unfortunately, this was enough for the girl to start trusting him. A familiar face, her sister's boyfriend. What danger! That's why Susan opened the door to him without fear, and thus sealed her own fate. She suspected nothing until it was too late. Stephanie had only 3 dates with the man, after which she decided not to continue the relationship. Something put her on edge. Maybe his gaze, maybe overly persistent questions. According to her, after the breakup, Mitchell came to the restaurant where she worked several times, ordered nothing, just sat at a table by the window and silently watched her for hours. He watched her deliver orders, smile at customers. It looked frightening, an unblinking gaze, a tense posture, so she decided to completely cut off all communication. She asked colleagues to say she wasn't there if he came. Nevertheless, he didn't give up. Instead, Mitchell left notes on her doorstep, short, without threats, but persistent. He came to her workplace again, tried to make contact, caught her after her shift. Stephanie was furious when she learned that one of her colleagues, a new hire who didn't know the situation, had given the guy her home address. Later, the woman justified herself, saying she didn't know about their breakup, thought she was helping. But now it was obvious. It was thanks to this that Susan was put in danger and became a victim. He knew the address. He knew that the girl was alone in the house with small children. In the 80s, during the investigation, Mitchell was even offered a polygraph test, a standard procedure for suspects. He agreed without hesitation, confidently, calmly, but the results were deemed ambiguous. The graphs fluctuated in certain places, but not enough to be considered a clear lie. Detectives conducted many interrogations. They sat across from him for hours in the interrogation room, asking the same questions in different ways, but the suspect didn't give in. He held up well. Due to the lack of irrefutable evidence, they failed to link him to the murder. They had to let him go. Finally, 37 years later, the criminal was apprehended. Justice was delayed, but it still came. He was charged with a list of offenses: murder, kidnapping, and unlawful acts. Moreover, according to the forensic expert's conclusion, it was unclear whether he committed these acts before inflicting the fatal wound or after. This had significance for the classification of the charges. The prosecutor continued to discuss with his team whether to demand life imprisonment without parole or to seek the ultimate penalty, the death penalty. Mitchell himself still did not admit guilt, sat in his cell, remained silent during interrogations. They decided to settle for life imprisonment. A death sentence could lead to even more litigation due to appeals, dragging out the process for years. Usually, in such cases, lawyers begin filing appeal after appeal, using all possible loopholes.